Welcome to this part of our program, and in this tutorial what we're going to be looking at are the different shooting modes that we see within our digital SLR camera, specifically our Nikon D60. If you look on the top of your camera, you're going to see that there's a dial on the right hand side that has 12 different shooting modes. The shooting modes that we're going to look at in this first part are the ones that are called digital vary programs. These are the point and shoot modes. When we set our camera to one of these modes, the camera takes care of some of the features and sets up the situation knowing the type of picture that we want to gather. So it goes all the way from this auto all the way over to this nighttime photo shoot program. The first program that we're going to look at is the auto mode. Now, the auto mode is pretty cool because basically it's a point and shoot mode. What that means is the camera takes complete control over the exposure. That means the shutter speed and the aperture. So the camera looks at the scene and the computer inside the camera says, oh, this is the type of scene that you're shooting and this is how it would best be represented, but you have no control over that. The camera does. So this is really good if you're out and you simply want to capture a scene without thinking about it too much, but you can't really guarantee the results that you're going to get. Now the second mode is called the auto flash off mode. Now this is basically the same as the auto mode, except this time we're telling the camera to never use the flash. In auto mode, if the flash is needed, the camera will open up the flash, which is on the top, and it will actually help augment the picture by adding flash. In this mode, the auto flash off mode, you're not allowed to use the flash at all. That means if you're in a scene where you shouldn't use the flash, or you've been told not to, say inside an old cathedral or museum, or you're at a wedding and the minister says no flash photography, you put your camera in this mode and no matter what the lighting is, that flash will not go off. Now this next mode that we've got is pretty slick. It's called the portrait mode, and the portrait mode has an aperture that is very large, so a small f number, and a very fast shutter speed. This means that the camera is very open. It means that when you take a picture, you're going to have a very shallow depth of field, so an f3.5 to f5.6, and the subject will be in focus, but what's in front of the subject and what's behind the subject will be out of focus. So in this mode, the computer within the camera says, okay, I know you're taking pictures of people. I'm going to look to make the skin tones a bit more pleasing. So it's not looking at it like it's a landscape mode, which is the next mode, but it's looking for the proper tones for skin. Now, landscape mode is basically the opposite of what the portrait mode is, and that is, in this scene, you have a very slow shutter speed, but a very large aperture, a small f number, or sorry, a large f number and a very small aperture. The amount of light that's coming in is very small, meaning the camera has to stay open longer. In this type of a picture, you get a lot of depth of field. So by using an f16 to f22 aperture, you're able to show a great deal of depth within the image. And in this mode, the camera knows to knows how to boost the greens and the blues in the image. The next mode, called the child mode, and again this is another one of the digital vary program modes, knows that you're going to be shooting people, so it pays attention to skin tones again, and it also tries to give a very soft look to the image, except the background and clothing details are very vivid. And again, it uses a very small aperture, just like in in the landscape mode. So it uses an f16 to f22, and unlike the portrait mode, where in that mode you're using a very wide open aperture of 3.5 to 5.6. Here the opening is very small. Now the next mode we have is called the sports mode, and if you've ever taken a picture of a car moving by really fast, if the shutter speed on your camera is slow, like 1/30th of a second or 1/60th of a second, you know that you get a lot of blur. Well, that might be what you're going for, but in sport mode, what you want to do is stop the action cold. So you want the shutter speed to be very fast. And to have the shutter speed very fast, you need a large aperture. So you've got a large aperture, which is a small f number, and a very fast shutter speed. And what this will do is it will direct your attention specifically onto the subject. Now, this uses what's called predictive focus, and that means that once it locks onto the subject, it will track that subject through your field of view, so it will always be in focus. It's an amazing feature. Now, the next one is called the close-up photography, or macro mode. And this is where the center is usually the subject is in the center of the image, and that is where you'll see like a little red square, and that is your focus. Now, you could focus to the left or to the right, as there are 3 different focuses within your field of view. It's important that you probably use a tripod, because when you're that close to a subject, it doesn't take much movement of the camera to get your subject out of focus. And this uses a very large aperture, again 3.5 to 5.6, so the subject that you're focusing on will be in focus, whereas those in the background will not. The final mode is just below that, and that is the nighttime mode, and that is taking a portrait of somebody at the night. So what this will do is it will try to balance out the background light that's naturally there and fill it, the front of the picture, with flash that comes right from your camera. Now, there are 4 advanced modes. The 4 advanced modes that we have are manual, automatic, shutter priority, and program. The first one that we're going to look at is manual. Now, in manual, this is the ultimate in user control. You control both the shutter speed and the aperture. So that means you can mess up a picture completely, or you can get that picture bang on based upon your skill level. Now, if we were looking at the back LCD of your camera, we can see if you see this 1/125th of a second, well, we set that by using the shutter speed button, and that's actually the dial on the back. So if you look at the back of your camera, you'll see a dial that's up near where your thumb would be if you're correctly holding the camera, and you would turn that back and forth. Now, that's how you set your shutter speed. To set your aperture, that is how wide the camera will actually be open, and that's like f5.6 or f16, there's a little button on the top that you're going to hold down, and it looks like it has a plus minus symbol in it. If you hold that down and then move that back dial, then you control the actual aperture. So the nice thing about this is you can control the shutter speed by just moving the toggle, moving that dial, and you can control the aperture by holding down that plus minus button and then moving the dial. The next mode is called aperture priority. Now, aperture priority is a semi-automatic mode, and what this does is the photographer controls the aperture, the camera controls the shutter speed. Why you might want to use that is in both wide varieties of usage, such as portraits and landscapes. So if you know that you want a very shallow depth of field, you set the depth of field and the camera sets the shutter speed. A lot of photographers like using this, especially if they're shooting weddings where motion is happening quickly. They set the aperture and let the camera control the shutter speed. Now, because you're in this mode, the toggle dial is enough to actually move your aperture. So when you adjust the aperture, the camera controls the shutter, so you only have to move the one dial. Pay attention to the back of your LCD screen and you'll see that actually working. Shutter priority mode works exactly the opposite. It's still a semi-automatic mode. You still have a lot of control, but in this case the photographer controls the shutter speed, the camera controls the aperture. And like before, you would spin that dial on the back and that would control your shutter speed, and the camera is going to control your aperture. So this is a good setting if you know the speed that you want to shoot at and you want the camera to just worry about the rest of it. So there's the little dial that you toggle. Now you saw that in manual mode. So in manual mode and in shutter priority mode, just turning that dial controls the shutter speed. The next mode is called program mode, and this one's pretty cool. In program mode, the camera automatically adjusts the shutter speed and aperture combination for optimal exposure in most situations. Now, if you rotate the dial in the back, you're going to go into something called flexible program mode. You may ask yourself, well, how do you know you're in flexible program mode? You'll know you're there when, as you can see in this image, there's a little tiny asterisk above the P. With that asterisk there, the camera is working out the same combinations so that you get a properly exposed image each time. In this program mode, you can see that that little P is right there, and when we turn that dial, we get a little asterisk that comes on the top. So if we're not on the mode the camera has set on its own, we're on a mode that we're setting, you're going to get that little asterisk. That means nothing. All that means for you is that you're flexible in the combination of shutter speed and priority, and you can determine what combination will work best for your image. I hope that helps, and now on to the next part of this program.